President Trump declared a national emergency. His reason? Unfair trade practices. This announcement came as a shock to many, but for those who had been following the escalating tensions, it was almost inevitable. The president had long been vocal about his dissatisfaction with the current trade agreements, which he believed were skewed against American interests. He argued that other countries were taking advantage of the United States, leading to a significant imbalance in trade. He pointed to the soaring trade deficit. This deficit, he claimed, was a clear indicator of how the U.S. was being shortchanged in its international trade deals. The numbers were indeed staggering, and they painted a picture of a nation that was importing far more than it was exporting. It had ballooned to $1.2 trillion. This figure was not just a number, it represented jobs lost, industries weakened, and a growing sense of economic vulnerability. For many Americans, this was a tangible sign that something needed to change. This was a 40% surge in just 5 years. Trump vowed action. He promised that his administration would take the necessary steps to correct this imbalance. His speeches were filled with a sense of urgency and determination, resonating with those who felt left behind by globalization. He promised to protect American workers. This promise was at the heart of his trade policy. He spoke of bringing jobs back to American soil, revitalizing industries that had been outsourced, and ensuring that American workers were given a fair shot in the global marketplace. This wasn't Trump's first trade war. He had a history of taking bold steps to address what he saw as unfair trade practices. His previous actions had already set the stage for a more aggressive stance. He had levied tariffs before. These tariffs were aimed at protecting American industries from foreign competition. While controversial, they were a clear signal of his commitment to reshaping the trade landscape. But this time felt different. The scope was wider, the rhetoric was harsher, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about tariffs on steel or aluminum, it was about a fundamental shift in how the U.S. engaged with the global economy. The global implications were graver. Countries around the world were watching closely, aware that any significant changes in U.S. trade policy could have ripple effects across the global economy. The interconnected nature of modern trade meant that no nation was isolated from these developments. The world watched with a mix of apprehension and resignation. There was a sense that a new era of economic uncertainty was beginning. Markets reacted with volatility, and businesses started to brace for potential disruptions. Many had hoped for a more conciliatory approach. Diplomats and trade experts had been advocating for dialogue and negotiation, believing that a more measured approach could yield better results without the risk of economic fallout. Instead, they got more of the same. The aggressive stance taken by the administration left little room for compromise. Supporters cheered the tough talk while critics warned of the potential consequences. Trump's declaration sent shockwaves through the global economy. Stock markets tumbled, and businesses began to reassess their strategies. The uncertainty created by the announcement was palpable, and it was clear that the coming months would be critical. It marked a significant escalation in trade tensions. The world was now on high alert, with many fearing that this could lead to a prolonged period of economic instability, and it raised fears of a full-blown trade war. The potential for retaliatory measures from other countries loomed large, and the prospect of a tit-for-tat escalation was a real concern. The future of global trade was now more uncertain than ever. Trump imposed sweeping tariffs. These tariffs were not just minor adjustments but significant economic measures that sent shockwaves through the global market. The administration's goal was clear: to protect American industries and reduce the trade deficit. However, the approach was aggressive and unprecedented. A 10% baseline hit all imports. This meant that every single product coming into the United States was subject to this new tax, affecting a wide range of industries from electronics to clothing. The immediate impact was felt by both consumers and businesses, but some countries faced harsher penalties. The administration targeted nations they believed were engaging in unfair trade practices or those with whom the U.S. had significant trade imbalances. This selective approach created a complex web of international trade tensions. China was slammed with a 34% tariff. This was a direct response to the long-standing trade deficit and accusations of intellectual property theft. The tariffs on Chinese goods were among the highest, signaling a major shift in U.S.-China trade relations. This brought the total to a staggering 54%, including existing tariffs. Europe wasn't spared either. The European Union, a major trading partner, found itself in the crosshairs as well. The tariffs on European goods were part of a broader strategy to renegotiate trade deals. A 20% tariff was imposed on their goods. This affected a wide range of products, from luxury cars to agricultural goods. European leaders were quick to respond, threatening retaliatory measures and sparking fears of a full-blown trade war. Japan faced a 24% levy. As one of America's closest allies, this move was surprising to many. The tariffs on Japanese goods were seen as a way to pressure Japan into opening its markets further to American products. Even smaller economies felt the sting. Countries with less economic power found themselves struggling to cope with the new tariffs. These nations often relied heavily on exports to the US, and the tariffs threatened their economic stability. Vietnam, Taiwan, and Myanmar were hit with tariffs exceeding 40%. The message was clear. The US was willing to take drastic measures to protect its economic interests, regardless of the potential fallout for smaller nations. Trump was willing to use tariffs as a weapon. This approach was a significant departure from previous administrations, which had favored negotiation and multilateral agreements. The use of tariffs as a punitive measure marked a new era in US trade policy. He aimed to reshape global trade in America's favor. But at what cost? The long-term effects of these tariffs were uncertain, with potential repercussions for global supply chains, international relations, and the American economy itself. The world watched closely as the trade wars unfolded, wondering what the future held. Global markets reacted swiftly and brutally. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq suffered their worst day in 5 years. Investors panicked, they dumped stocks, uncertainty gripped the markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged over 1,000 points. The tech-heavy Nasdaq saw even steeper declines. The losses wiped out trillions of dollars in value. The market crash was a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the global economy. When one major player stumbles, everyone feels the pain. Economists sounded the alarm. They warned of a looming recession. The tariffs, they argued, would stifle economic growth. They would disrupt supply chains, and they would lead to higher prices for consumers. Inflation, already a concern, threatened to spiral out of control. The tariffs would only exacerbate the problem. Stagflation, a toxic combination of stagnant growth and high inflation, became a real possibility. The economic outlook was bleak. The tariffs had cast a long shadow over the global economy. Section 5. Retirees caught in the crossfire. Retirees faced a double whammy. The market crash eroded their savings and rising prices threatened their fixed incomes. Many relied on their investment portfolios to supplement their Social Security checks. The market downturn put their financial security at risk. Inflation added insult to injury. The rising cost of goods and services chipped away at their purchasing power. Retirees, many on fixed incomes, found it harder to make ends meet. The trade war had real-world consequences for millions of Americans. It wasn't just about abstract economic indicators, it was about people's lives. Section 6. Retaliation on the horizon. International backlash was swift and fierce. Canada vowed immediate retaliation. Mexico promised to respond in kind. The European Union threatened a strong plan of its own. The trade war threatened to escalate into a global conflict. Countries prepared to defend their interests. Tit-for-tat tariffs loomed. The prospect of a trade war spiraling out of control was all too real. Section 7. Domestic tremors. The trade war wasn't the only storm brewing in America. Domestic issues also demanded attention. The Department of Health and Human Services announced 10,000 job cuts. The move, part of a broader effort to reduce the federal workforce, sparked controversy. However, some programs slated for elimination were reinstated. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a vocal critic of the cuts, championed their restoration. The episode highlighted the ongoing debate over the role of government in providing social services. Section 8. Medicare's uncertain future. Medicare, the federal health insurance program for seniors, faced its own set of challenges. A bipartisan bill aimed to reform the program's prior authorization process. The bill, if passed, would require specialist reviews for certain procedures. Proponents argued that the reforms would reduce unnecessary costs and improve patient care. Critics countered that the added bureaucracy would create barriers to timely treatment. The fate of Medicare remained uncertain. Section 9. Bracing for the storm. As if trade wars and domestic turmoil weren't enough, Americans also face the annual threat of hurricanes. Each year, the Atlantic hurricane season brings with it a sense of dread and urgency, especially for those living in coastal areas. The preparations begin early, with residents boarding up their homes, stocking up on supplies, and sometimes even evacuating to safer locations. The atmosphere is tense, filled with a mix of anxiety and determination. The Colorado State University Hurricane Forecast predicted above-average activity for the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. This forecast is not just a random guess, it is the result of meticulous research and analysis by some of the brightest minds in meteorology. These experts use a combination of historical data, current weather patterns, and advanced computer models to make their predictions. Their work is crucial in helping communities prepare for what lies ahead. The forecast called for 15 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. This means that the season could be particularly destructive, with multiple storms potentially making landfall and causing significant damage. The animated maps and charts used by meteorologists help visualize these potential paths, making it easier for people to understand the risks and take necessary precautions. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration echoed CSU's predictions, urging coastal residents to prepare for an active season. NOAA's role in hurricane preparedness cannot be overstated. They provide real-time updates and warnings, helping to save lives and minimize property damage. Their collaboration with local authorities ensures that evacuation plans are in place and that resources are available when needed. From trade wars to healthcare reform to natural disasters, 2025 promised to be a year of challenges and uncertainty. The nation was already grappling with significant issues, and the added threat of a severe hurricane season only compounded the stress. Images of protests and rallies highlighted the social and political tensions, while footage of past hurricane damage served as a stark reminder of the potential devastation. Only time would tell how these events would unfold and what their ultimate impact would be. The year ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, with many hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. As the clock ticked and the weather patterns shifted, the world watched and waited, bracing for whatever storms, both literal and metaphorical, might come their way.